I'm first of all, I'm so sorry for the loss of your friend and collaborator. As a movie fan and a fan of great acting, he was special to all of us, I know.
Yeah, it's almost surprising how many people have responded and are affected by it. You know?
Yeah. I won't take up too much of your time. I just wanted to ask you a few questions about him.
Sure.
In your observation, what made his particular gifts so ideally suited to bring Tony Soprano to life?
I think the thing that occurred to me was that Jim combined some qualities that are not typical of the world of mob bosses and so on, which was a very singular kind of vulnerability, which I think Jim himself had, and obviously which he brought to Tony Soprano. When you think about the great portrayers of tough guys, Jimmy Cagney or Humphrey Bogart, for example, come to mind, they were not notably vulnerable figures.
Mm-hmm.
Even the great Godfather films, that quality was not the primary quality of the tough guys in that. I mean, to a degree, of course, certainly Pacino had that, but I think that Jim combined it with, a highly sensitive kind of inner life, as well as the uncommon quality of being a sex symbol without being the typical svelte, tanned, sex god. He was definitely not that, and yet women, I know for a fact, found him alluring. And so you combine sexual magnetism with Jim's physique, with a particularly strong, sensitive inner life, and the tough guy quality. That was pretty unique in the annals of film and television.
Well, you're hearing it again and again in the tributes that are popping up, that many people felt that he was one of us. I mean, there was a very authentic, almost blue-collar quality about him. And I think that's what made his portrayal of Tony Soprano so unique as well. It wasn't limited to a tough guy.
I think you've put your finger on something that's really right. That is to say that blue collar quality, which I think Cagney had a little bit, but really no one had it to the degree that Jim did, because I don't think any of the people that portrayed that were that, and I think Jim was. I mean that was his background. His understanding of that quality was very much informed, I believe, by his own life. The couple of times I saw his father, I mean, he's very much from a world that, a blue-collar world, and I think that was very, very authentic, and I think you're right. I think that it allowed every kind of person to identify with him, and of course, you can't ignore the writing, which made that possible, too.
Yeah, absolutely. We all know what an extraordinary presence he was in the finished product, but what was he like on the set?
Well, he was very, very professional. By that I mean there wasn't a lot of hanging out and having warm and cuddly conversations. I mean, he was really interested in the work. I think that he was a very real example of what has become a cliche, but in Jim's case was true, which was that he lived the role, if not entirely off screen, certainly when he was there preparing, so he would get himself in the mood for the scene, and if that meant that he was in an explosive and angry temperament because of something that had happened off camera, he would use that, or he would create that. And I really do believe, I never had the chance to ask Jim about it, but I believe that he sometimes created circumstances that allowed him to feel the feelings that were appropriate for the scene, and then those would explode into the scene. So as long as you didn't take it personally, it worked. It was great. But he was a very complex man. There's no question about it.
When you think back on your time with him, do you have a most cherished memory with him?
Well, that would be an odd word to use, given how, as I say, complicated Jim was, and how he could be, in an effort to get into character, a prickly guy, just right, in the moment. But so, and because he was such a professional, there wasn't a lot of personal, exchange. Curiously enough, until several years after we finished the series, and then I ran into him in the theater, and we had this very quiet, and I would call it sort of intimate conversation. And then again, when I visited him after he finished a performance of Gods of Carnage in Los Angeles, I went to visit him afterwards, and it was like suddenly what had been a very professional and at times challenging relationship. Suddenly, all of that was in the past, and he was he was a different person. He was a very warm and charming and sweet-natured guy, which I believe lay beneath, the surface of Jim, and which he drew on, but which was not exhibited much when we were doing The Sopranos. I think that part of him he kept pretty well hidden. Plus, I think Jim was very deeply conflicted about the enormous success that came on him so suddenly as a result of The Sopranos. I think
absolutely, and that coupled with the difficult, oftentimes dark nature of living in that role.
Yes,
I would imagine. Yeah, it's quite a dynamic.
Yeah, you're right.
But Tony Soprano casts such a large shadow. It would for any actor, the influence of that show in that particular role. How do you think he built upon that in his film career post-Sopranos, and where do you think he was yet to go?
Well, of course, it's impossible to know, but I think what Jim did, and what I think was a sign of his high intelligence, was, first of all, I think he didn't immediately start doing every mob boss available. He avoided the obvious temptation because I think he was smart enough to know that therein lay the death of his career, if he had just repeated himself, because there's no question that it would have been very hard for him to have found a role of that sophistication and complexity again. So I think my impression was that he was very reluctant to dive back into something like that. And so I think he kind of held back. He started producing, as I'm sure you know, documentaries. I think if I were to say what it struck me as was an example of someone who was smart enough to realize that he could not repeat that success in that world, and that he then started looking for other outlets, kind of stepped back in a way from that role, and took time, I think, to figure out what was next. And he became a producer. I would love to have seen what else he would have produced over time, including dramatic work, which I think he might have eventually gotten involved with. And also I think it's a pity not to see what he would have been capable of in entirely different roles. I know, for example, that he was going to do HBO's Criminal Justice, which Richard Price was writing, and I was lucky enough to read the early scripts, and he was going to play a slovenly but extremely good and well-meaning lawyer. And I think it would have been really interesting, and I am sorry to see that he didn't get to play that role, because I think it would have been, the character was a kind of good version of Tony Soprano, a smart, good guy who's on the right side of the law, but who's kind of a slob. And I think it would have been really interesting to see Jim play that, and I'm sorry to see that he's not going to get to.
Yeah, me too. Mr. Coulter, my condolences to you again. And let me just tell you, I'm a huge fan of your work, and the college episode, and I know you hear this a lot, is probably the greatest hour of television I've ever seen. And I think it's the moment where you guys really found Tony Soprano and that sense of duality in that character. I think it really came to life starting in that episode. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, and thanks for that comment. I know that David Chase actually agrees with you that for some reason that episode as he's said on a number of occasions, told him what the show really was going to be. And it was without going off about it, it was a big moment for me too, because I remember when I got the gig, and because I'd seen the pilot, which was magnificent, and when I saw that episode, I thought, I really know how to do this, and I'm glad that others agree.